Okay, so today we're going to dive into something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah,
Two sets of ideas that you wouldn't think would necessarily go together,
right.
but we're going to find out maybe they do, maybe they don't. We'll see.
Yeah, exactly. We like to, juxtapose things and see what comes out of that, the
Yeah.
unexpected connections and
Exactly.
pathways.
So we have one area that we're going to look at is this idea of monetized time space,
Oh, okay.
which sounds very kind of heady and out there, but it really is about the world of finance
Right.
and specifically financial derivatives.
Interesting.
And so it's like we've created a market around future possibilities,
Yeah.
which is really kind of wild when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is the essence of speculation in a way, but it's gotten so sophisticated and so complex.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to kind of unpack a little bit.
Yeah.
And then on the completely other side of the spectrum,
Oh, okay.
we have excerpts from the Law of One. And this is really getting into these big questions about consciousness,
Right.
spiritual evolution,
Yeah.
and the nature of reality itself.
Yeah.
So how do these two things connect? That's what we're here to find out.
That's the question, isn't it? And I think our listeners are probably intrigued and maybe a little bit skeptical,
Yeah,
but that's what makes this fun.
exactly. So for this deep dive, you've given us a really interesting pairing.
Yes, you have.
So on the one hand, we have this academic paper that really dissects how financial instruments have evolved over time,
Okay.
particularly focusing on these things called derivatives.
Right.
And then on the other side, we have this selection from the Law of One, specifically Book 3, Sessions 51 through 75.
Okay. Yeah. So this is already building on, quite a bit of material from the previous session.
Exactly. So listeners, if you're not familiar with the Law of One,
Yeah.
this might not be the best place to jump in.
Right. Go back and listen to some of our earlier deep dives where we covered the earlier sessions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll try to give you the basics, but there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah. There's a rich history there.
For sure. So our mission today
Okay.
is to really try to understand what are the core ideas within each of these domains. They seem very separate,
Right.
but then to see what happens when we put them together.
Yeah. When we kind of hold them up, side by side.
Yes.
Do they illuminate each other? Do they clash? What happens?
Exactly. And I have a feeling some interesting stuff's going to come out of this.
I think so too.
So let's start with this idea of monetized time space.
Okay. Let's ground ourselves in the material world first.
Right. So this academic paper really starts by making this point that, since around the 1970s,
Okay.
we've seen this huge increase in risk-taking in the financial world.
Right. Everyone's looking for that edge, right?
Exactly. And a big driver of this has been market competition.
Okay.
And, everyone's trying to get ahead.
Yeah, it's a global game now.
It is.
Hmm.
And along with that, we've had the development of these new financial tools called derivatives. And the authors, they're referencing someone in Goldstein here.
Okay.
They argue that this has actually changed how financial experts understand, like, the basic workings of the market.
So the tools themselves have changed the very assumptions.
It's like the rules of the game have shifted.
Yeah, it's like we've moved from a board game to like a video game with, all sorts of new dimensions and possibilities.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is this period also saw this, like, rise in uncertainty around exchange rates.
Oh, yeah. That was a volatile time for currencies.
And one of the authors, they're referencing someone named Harris here,
Okay.
he points out that this uncertainty wasn't just about currencies.
Right.
It actually started to spread to other parts of economic life.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. And it led to this kind of quickening of economic activity.
So things are speeding up.
Things are moving faster.
Yeah.
And the paper suggests that this isn't just limited to traditional money,
Okay.
like, physical dollars and cents.
Right.
It extends to these new types of financial instruments, like derivatives.
So the uncertainty and this quickening is impacting even these kind of bets on the future.
Exactly. Because that's really what a derivative is, in essence, right? It's a bet on future value.
Right. It's deriving its value from something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So before we even try to get our heads around what a derivative actually is,
Okay.
the paper highlights a couple of really important changes that have happened in the financial landscape.
All right. So the stage is set.
Yes. So first of all,
Mm-hmm.
we have this almost instantaneous flow of information now.
Right. With computers and the internet.
Exactly. thanks to all this technology
Yeah.
and these increasingly deregulated markets.
It's all happening at lightning speed.
It's like the financial world is operating at hyperspeed.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to even keep up with it sometimes.
It is. And then the second thing is this widespread acceptance of disruption.
Oh, so like everyone knows that things can change really quickly.
Exactly.
That the rug could be pulled out from under you at any moment.
Right? So it creates this sense of like constant potential upheaval.
Yeah, you got to be on your toes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the game has changed.
It definitely has.
The rules are different.
Yeah.
Now, how do we actually understand these derivatives?
Right. What are they in practice?
To make it a bit more concrete, the paper uses this example of Orange County.
Okay.
They essentially borrowed a ton of money.
Right.
And they used securities as collateral.
Okay.
And then they tied the value of this borrowed money to predictions about how interest rates would move.
So they're betting on the future of interest rates.
Exactly. And that's a derivative in action.
Oh, I see. So the value of what they borrowed is derived from these interest rate predictions.
Exactly.
Okay.
But here's the thing.
Uh-oh.
Their plans completely backfired when the Federal Reserve suddenly raised interest rates.
So their bet went the wrong way.
It did. And it actually led to a huge financial crisis in Orange County.
Wow. So this is a real-world example of how these derivatives can be so risky.
Exactly. They're powerful tools, but they can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
And this really highlights what a derivative is all about.
Oh.
Its value is derived from something else.
Right. We talked about that.
And it's totally tied to future possibilities and to risk.
Yeah. You're betting on something that hasn't happened yet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think.
Okay. Alrighty.
The paper brings in this thinker named Verilio.
Verilio. Okay.
And he talks about this constant flow of financial information that's being sent and received across the globe.
Right. It's like a global nervous system almost.
It is. And his argument is really quite stark.
Okay.
He suggests that this blurring between virtual and real-time space,
Okay.
which is being driven by all these financial flows, could actually end up destroying the world as we know it.
Wow. That's a strong statement.
It is. It's a really powerful statement about how this abstract financial layer could impact our physical reality.
So it's not just numbers on a screen. It's actually shaping the world.
Right. And he also notes how this constant speed, this hyperspeed we were talking about, actually intensifies our experience of the present moment.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like the faster things move, the more present we become in a way.
In a way, yeah. Because we're constantly having to react to what's happening right now.
We don't have time to think about the past or the future.
Right, exactly. Now, if we connect this to another thinker, Simmel,
Okay, Simmel.
and his concept of effortless enrichment
Effortless enrichment.
and passive enrichment,
Passive enrichment.
through these increasingly abstract flows of money,
Okay.
we start to see this picture of a financial world that's becoming more and more disconnected from actual physical assets.
Right. It's not about owning land or gold anymore.
Exactly. It's becoming much more about information,
Mm-hmm.
expectations about the future.
So it's almost like wealth is becoming less about what you have
Right.
and more about what you think is going to happen.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
So the central argument that this paper is making is that derivatives are like the ultimate symbol of this dynamic, informationalized, high-speed financial space we live in.
Okay, so they're like the tip of the spear.
They are.
Yeah.
And they're arguing that derivatives are basically changing how we understand time and space in the context of money.
So they're creating this new map of reality almost.
Exactly. And they're fostering this whole new money imaginary.
Money imaginary.
Which is like, it's no longer just about trading goods and services right now in the present.
Right.
It's about making these really complex bets on the future value of things.
And those things might be many layers removed from any actual physical commodity.
Exactly.
It's wild.
It is pretty mind-bending.
And the paper makes this important distinction.
Yeah.
They contrast this view, which is informed by thinkers like Simmel and Verilio.
Who are looking at these big cultural and technological shifts.
All right. They contrast that with more traditional economic and sociological perspectives on how derivatives emerged.
So like the more orthodox explanation.
Right.
Those more traditional approaches might focus on the idea of rational actors
Okay.
and markets that efficiently manage risk.
Right.
This paper is saying, no, no, no.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. They're offering a different lens.
Okay.
They're highlighting the almost imaginative and constantly evolving nature of finance today.
So it's less about rationality and more about creativity and adaptation.
Exactly. It's a whole different way of looking at
Okay.
it. They even bring up this example of something called geo-money.
Geomoney, what is that?
Or weather derivatives.
Weather derivatives, so you can, like, bet on the weather?
Basically, yeah. Companies can buy these financial instruments to protect themselves against things like, unexpected frost that might damage crops,
Oh.
or excessive rain that could impact outdoor events.
So you can essentially take out insurance against the weather.
Exactly. Through these complex financial products.
That's amazing.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
And it raises this really crucial point about the role of mathematics in all of this.
Okay, so math is at the heart of this new financial world.
The paper emphasizes how math is absolutely central to this transformation in finance.
Okay.
And it's linked to what one of the authors they're referencing, someone named Thrift.
Okay.
He describes this as perceptual labor and expertise.
Perceptual labor and expertise.
This is like you need highly specialized knowledge and skills to understand these instruments.
So you can't just be like a regular accountant or something.
Right. You need to be able to think in these really complex mathematical terms and to model and trade these incredibly complex instruments.
So it's like a whole new language almost.
It is.
Yeah.
And the paper also mentions this idea from another thinker, Nora Satina.
Okay.
And she talks about this architecture of flows.
Architecture of flows.
And she's talking about how real-time data screens
Okay.
are constantly projecting and updating this fluid market reality.
So it's like a constantly shifting landscape.
It is.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to see those shifts and understand them.
Yeah, you got to be plugged into the matrix.
Exactly. And all of these flows of information, they aren't just happening in some abstract space.
Right.
There are real-world systems that support them.
Okay.
Nora Satina calls them support systems.
Support systems.
And this includes things like trading floors that are operating across different time zones.
Right. So the market never sleeps.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And then these really intricate global reflex systems
Okay.
that help to create this sense of market unity
Okay.
and allow for the movement of capital all around the world.
So it's like a global circulatory system?
It is. And it creates this picture of a financial world that's incredibly interconnected.
Okay.
But it's also still physically concentrated in major hubs like New York and London.
Right. Those are still the centers of power.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's where this time space is being drawn in, mathematized, and made financial.
Wow. So it's like those cities are becoming these vortexes of financial energy.
They are. Which leads to a really fundamental question that the paper poses.
Okay, hit me with it.
They're asking you, the listener, what are the real-world consequences of this?
Oh, wow. Okay, so putting it back on us.
Right, of this process of taking time and space, turning it into equations, and recirculating it as these tiny bits of information.
It's like we're encoding reality into this digital financial language.
And then what happens? How does that affect the world we live in?
Right. Does it change how we perceive time and space? Does it change our values?
Exactly. Big questions.
Yeah.
And then the paper goes on to talk about the fictional nature of financial speculation.
Oh, this is interesting.
So they're saying that this boundless wealth,
Which everyone's chasing.
exactly, that's being pursued in these markets is really just a bet on the future.
Right. So it's not actually real yet.
It's a temporalized good,
Temporalized good.
where the potential wealth of tomorrow is creating real effects and sometimes even illusions in the present.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
It can be. And they emphasize that speculation is all about the future tense. It's built on these probabilities and possibilities that haven't happened yet.
So it's almost like writing a story about the future.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And then seeing if that story comes true.
Yeah, and there's so much uncertainty involved.
There is.
You never know what's going to happen.
And the paper talks about this idea of speculation as a realistic fiction,
Realistic fiction.
which I think is really insightful
I like that.
because its realism is constantly being tested against what actually happens.
Right, so the market is the ultimate judge.
Exactly. And that's why when a speculative bubble bursts,
Yeah.
it's often described as like a breakdown of this illusion.
Right. The story didn't match up with reality.
Right. The imagined future clashed with what's actually happening in the present.
That's a great way to put it.
And what's fascinating is the paper highlights how successful brokers,
Okay.
they need to cultivate a kind of speculative fantasy.
Speculative fantasy, so they need to be able to imagine the future.
They need to have a vision of how the market might move. But at the same time, they need to stay grounded in reality.
Right, so they need to be able to distinguish between what's real and what's imagined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a really delicate balance to strike.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And the paper argues that the ability to navigate this balance between fantasy and reality is what separates the winners from the losers.
So it's not just about being good at math.
Right.
It's about having this almost like psychological intuition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to understand the psychology of the market,
Yeah. The emotional side of it.
the emotional side of it.
That's fascinating.
And this leads into a discussion of crowd semantics
Crowd semantics. Okay.
and how it's similar to market semantics.
So how crowds and markets operate in similar ways.
Exactly. And they both kind of suggest this radical type of equality.
Oh, interesting. So like everyone's on a level playing field.
In theory.
Yeah. Okay.
Because market logic, at least in theory, operates beyond traditional hierarchies.
Right. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from.
Exactly. And crowd dynamics also tend to blur individual differences.
Right. Everyone gets swept up in the same energy.
Right. But the paper points out that crowd psychology also makes us question whether everyone having access to markets
Like with online trading and stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
actually means that everyone's going to participate competently.
Right. Just because you have access doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
Exactly. And so it kind of challenges this modern idea
Mhm.
that more access is always better.
Yeah. It's a bit more nuanced than that.
It is. And what's interesting is how crowd semantics has evolved.
Okay. How so?
Instead of focusing on how to control this potentially irrational crowd,
Right.
the emphasis has shifted to the individual investor
Okay.
and their responsibility to manage their own emotions and biases.
Oh, so it's about self-control in
Exactly.
the face of all this market craziness.
Exactly. You need to have a strong sense of who you are
Right.
and be able to make rational decisions.
So you don't get swept away by the herd.
Exactly. There's this quote in the paper that I love.
Okay, what is it?
It says, "If you don't know who you are, this is an expensive place to find out."
Ouch. Yeah, that's a good one.
Right. So that gives us a good overview of this monetized time-space idea.
Yeah, that was a lot to unpack, but I think I'm starting to get it.
It's a complex topic,
It is.
but it's really fascinating how it's changing our relationship to time, space, and value.
Absolutely.
Now let's completely shift gears
Okay.
and dive into the law of one.
All right, let's get metaphysical.
So the excerpts you gave us are from Book 3, Sessions 51 through 75.
Okay.
And as we mentioned, this is building on 50 previous sessions.
Right, so we're jumping into a conversation that's already in progress.
Exactly. So the fundamental idea here, and this is established in the earlier books,
Okay.
is that all things are one.
All things are one.
All beings are one.
Okay, so it's a philosophy of unity.
Exactly.
And-
And within this understanding of unity,
Yeah.
these sessions really delve into a wide range of metaphysical concepts.
Okay, give me some examples.
So one recurring idea is this concept of catalyst.
Catalyst.
And it's about how individual beings, which they call mind-body-spirit complexes, evolve.
Mind, body, spirit complexes. Okay, so it's like a holistic view of the individual.
Exactly.
Huh.
And they say that the sublogos,
Sublogos.
which is like a localized expression of the universal creative principle,
Okay.
provides the initial catalyst for growth.
So it's like the initial spark that sets us on our journey.
Exactly. But eventually, individuals develop the capacity to consciously shape their own experiences.
Oh, so we become our own catalysts.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for our own growth and evolution.
That's empowering.
It is. They also talk about these energy centers within the body.
Okay, like chakras.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
They often refer to them as rays,
Rays.
and they range from red to violet.
Red to violet. Okay.
And these centers are described as acting like filters for incoming energy.
Oh, interesting. So they're like lenses that shape how we experience energy.
Exactly. And this energy is drawn upwards through the centers
Okay.
based on an individual's distortions,
Distor-
which are like areas of imbalance or unresolved issues.
So like our baggage.
Yeah, basically.
Um,
And also based on their conscious desire for inner light and understanding.
So the more we seek, the more we grow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And apparently within a pyramid structure,
Okay. This is getting interesting.
this energy follows a spiraling path,
A spiraling path.
and it concentrates and radiates outwards at specific points,
Okay.
like the king's chamber.
So the pyramid is like a giant energy machine.
That's how they describe it.
Wow.
Now, the sessions also touch on this concept of psychic attack
Psychic attack.
and its potential impact on individuals.
Okay, so like negative energy being directed at someone.
Exactly.
And they talk about this in relation to the instrument.
Right. So the person who's channeling the communication,
Right.
they were experiencing these attacks.
Wow, that's intense.
It was. And they mentioned this group called the Orion Group
The Orion group.
as a possible source of this negative influence.
So they're like a negative force in the universe.
They represent a philosophy that's focused on service to self
Service to self.
rather than service to others.
Okay, so it's like a selfish orientation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Another fascinating concept is this idea of wanderers.
Wanderers.
And these are described as beings who have evolved to higher densities of consciousness.
Okay.
So the fourth, fifth, and sixth densities.
Okay.
And they choose to incarnate into our third density reality.
So they're like volunteers coming to help us.
In a way,
Yeah.
they come to offer service to others
Okay.
by radiating love and understanding.
So they're like beacons of light.
Exactly. But interestingly, there are also negatively oriented wanderers.
Oh, so they can be positive or negative.
Right. And they come to serve themselves by creating opportunities for negative polarization in others.
Oh, so they're like the opposite of the light workers.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's mentioned that these wanderers experience this kind of forgetting
Forget it.
of their higher density awareness
Okay.
when they enter third density.
So they have to kind of relearn everything.
They do. It's like a veil is placed over their true nature.
Wow, that's wild.
It is. And they talk about this planetary transition that's happening right now
A planetary transition.
into the fourth density.
Okay, so like a shift in consciousness.
Exactly. And they say that our current state
Uh-huh.
is this blend of what they call yellow and green ray environments.
Yellow and green ray environments.
And this necessitates the emergence of these transitional types of mind, body, spirit complexes.
Oh, so we're like in between stages.
They are. And the communication talks about the difference between a partial and a full activation of the fourth density sphere,
Okay.
which is associated with the true green ray of unconditional love.
So we're moving towards a more loving state of being.
In theory, yeah.
Okay.
Now, it's also interesting to note that the material states that paranormal events,
Okay.
they're not just meant to increase seeking or curiosity.
Okay.
They're actually natural manifestations of individuals
Okay.
whose vibrational frequency allows them to come into contact with intelligent infinity,
Intelligent infinity.
which is like the underlying consciousness of the universe.
Okay, so it's like they're tuned into a different channel.
Exactly. And the choice to be of service, they say, is a direct result of free will,
Free will.
not just the possession of these abilities.
So it's about how you choose to use your abilities.
Exactly. And then they get into this concept of the higher self,
The higher self.
which is presented as a being existing in the mid-sixth density.
Mid-sixth density.
And it offers guidance and support to its expressions in lower densities,
Okay.
like our third density self.
So it's like a wiser, more evolved version of ourselves?
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
And they clarify that you as an individual in third density and your higher self,
Uh-huh.
you're not in two separate physical locations.
Okay.
It's more like you represent different aspects of the same being
Mm-hmm.
across time and space.
So it's all connected.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then they even get into the nature of time and space itself.
Oh, wow.
They introduce this idea of positive and negative time space,
Positive and negative time space.
which are like different kinds of vibrations within the fabric of space-time.
So it's like there are different flavors of time and space.
Exactly.
All
It's
right.
a very abstract way of thinking about these things.
That sounds like it.
And then they discuss this thing called white magic,
White magic.
which is described as the experience of profound joy in union with the Creator.
Okay.
And this joy then naturally radiates outwards
Okay.
through the positive aid of life.
So it's like a ripple effect of positivity.
Exactly. And they also mention the careful use of sexual energy in high magic
Oh, interesting.
as a powerful means of uniting the body, mind, and spirit with the Creator.
So it's about harnessing that energy for spiritual purposes.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the material really emphasizes that the primary purpose of the raw communication
Ah.
and other similar teachings or experiences
Okay.
is to act as a vehicle for partial enlightenment
Partial enlightenment.
for those who are consciously aware of their own spiritual evolution.
So it's like a guidepost along the path.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they say that free will,
Uh-huh.
when it becomes highly focused
Yeah.
and what they call one-pointed in service to others,
One pointed in service to others.
has the potential to generate a huge amount of positive energy
Okay.
that they call a great mass of light strength.
A great mass of light strength.
And they make this distinction with service to self,
Okay.
where negative actions also attract and amplify their positive counterparts.
So it's like a mirror image.
It is.
Okay.
Now, apparently anyone can instantaneously clear and balance their energy centers.
Wait, really?
Yeah, through a focused application of love and will.
So it's like a superpower we all have.
In a way, yeah.
Cool.
But they say that actually being a healer
Okay.
requires more training
Okay.
in the disciplines of personality.
So you need to understand yourself really well.
Exactly. And how these energy systems work.
Right.
Then they introduce this idea of the archetypal mind,
Archetype.
which is specific to the particular logos that influences experience in this specific region of space and time.
Okay, so it's like a blueprint for consciousness.
In a way, yeah.
Okay.
And they say that logoi that are closer to us in the cosmic structure
Uh-huh.
will have archetypes that are more directly relevant to our experience.
So it's like a cosmic family tree.
It is.
Okay.
And then they talk about the veiling process,
The veiling process.
which is a defining characteristic of our third density experience.
Okay.
And they describe it as a kind of agreement made by the mind,
Okay.
recognizing its own complexity.
So the mind veiled itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this then had effects on the body and spirit
Okay.
before this veil came into place.
Uh-huh.
Mind-body-spirit complexes had conscious control over bodily functions that we now consider automatic.
Wow, so we were more in control of our bodies.
Exactly.
And-
And the choice of polarization,
Polarization.
whether towards service to others or service to self,
Right.
at the end of third density is highlighted as a crucial philosophical plan for the kinds of experiences that are available in higher densities.
So it determines our path.
It does. And
Yeah.
beyond third density, the underlying structure of the logos becomes more apparent,
Okay.
and these veils of perception are lifted.
So we see things more clearly?
Exactly.
Okay.
And the communication mentions 7 primary archetypes of the mind.
7 archetypes.
And they suggest a relationship between these archetypes and the 7 densities of consciousness.
So like a correspondence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they also note a potential connection between the 7 bodily energy centers.
Beta, rain, rays.
Exactly.
Okay.
And these archetypes.
So it's all interconnected?
It is. And they introduce concepts like the matrix,
Matrix.
the potentiator,
Potentiator.
and the significator of the mind
significator of the mind.
as further aspects related to these archetypes and how the mind works.
Okay, so it's like a whole system of understanding the mind.
Exactly.
Cool.
And they say that both positively and negatively polarized beings,
Okay.
which they call adepts,
Adept.
they develop the capacity to draw power directly through their spirit from the
Sure.
universe.